Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Spilling Tea. I am your host, Tiffany Daniels. Now, a few quick things before we get going this morning. First of all, folks, as always, you can find the link to what we go over in this video in the description box, along with the video that kicked off this series on the JRC. You will also find in there the change.org Shut the Judge Rotenberg Center Down petition. If you haven't signed that, please go ahead and do so and share on all your social media. Also, I do apologize in advance if I mangle any legal jargon this morning. I do apologize. I have not had my second dose of caffeine yet. Also, folks, if you watch these videos and you have young children present, we do both discuss and detail, and on occasion there are depictions, people with disabilities being tortured. So, please, folks, use your headphones. So, we are going back to that wonderful world, as Tug usually says, of the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center Incorporated versus the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. We are moving on to part 4 now, withholding of draft documents. So I noticed, folks, these people like to just go on and on and on and on and on about freaking documents when they had a document over 126 pages long, and that's probably the edited version. So, without that, we'll just go ahead and read through it, alright? I don't understand these people's logic. I think they're insane. Finally, the plaintiffs also contend that the defendants have improperly withheld draft documentations under Exemption 5. Oh my god. So now you finally came out and said it. I knew it was coming, folks. I knew it was coming. They are saying that the FDA withheld documents in regards to enforcing this ban. But folks, we read through those documents, and the fact that they withheld draft documents had to do with relevance and age and whether that data that they were not reporting could be corroborated or not. Oftentimes, they would say take things with a grain of salt. In fact, that was one of the most biased pieces of documents I have ever read. By and large, they agree with how the JRC looks at people with autism and behavioral disorders. Throughout the whole thing, we see ableist language in just about every single 126 pages that we read. But they want to go ahead and claim that they withheld draft documents under Exemption 5. Interesting. So, moving forward, documents designated as drafts are not per se covered under deliberative process privilege, but rather must meet the same 2 criteria as any other record. Arthur Anderson. In addition, a draft that was pre-decisional and deliberative when prepared may lose that status if it is adopted, formally or informally, as the agency position on an issue or is used by the agency in its dealings with the public. Additionally, factual information which does not bear on the policy formulation is not subject to the deliberative process privilege. The plaintiffs first argue that the defendants withheld drafts or parts of drafts that the FDA ultimately adopted. As I said, they're saying they are not doing their due diligence, basically, is what they're trying to say here. Sorry, thought I saw a bug. Moving on. Excuse me a second. I'm sorry, guys. I don't have an edit button, so give me just a second. One moment. I'm sorry, guys. Like I said, I don't have an edit button, and it is too late in the morning for me to start over, so we'll go again here. Okay. Where were we? Okay. The plaintiffs argue that the defendants withheld drafts or parts of drafts that the FDA ultimately adopted, or at a minimum, defendants failed to establish otherwise. That almost, I'm not fluent in this side of legal jargon, but it almost sounds like they feel like the FDA failed to establish their basis for the ban, which is complete bullshit. But I digress. Or at a minimum, the blah blah blah. I just read that. Okay. Defendants admit that the information in several records may have been adopted in the government's final document. As examples, the plaintiffs cite 3 partially withheld drafts of letters subsequently sent to the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture. Okay, so basically, here they're trying to say that the FDA gave weight to the letters received from the UN in regards to the skin shocks. But the fact of the matter is, why would they not include it? They included without bias, not just the UN, but they got everybody's side into that 126-page document, including the JRCs. They even cited at least 4 or 5 of their own studies and data on the subject. I don't see what the problem is here. An index at 139 through 40, 940 through 41,963, third index at 140 through 41, 962 through 63, 985 through 86, a partially withheld draft of key messages and responsive Q&As, which contain talking points about the proposed rule. There's that we think they're withholding things from the public. Jesus Christ. If it wasn't relevant, they weren't going to tell us, okay? God. And index 288 through 89, third index at 290 through 91, a fully withheld draft of the proposed ban. See second index at 474 through 75, and third index 481 through 82. And a partially withheld draft from a form which captured observations made during an inspection of the JRC premises. That is very much part of the ban. So, index at 1607, third index at 1636 through 37. Defendants answered that, at most, the plaintiff showed that some of the drafts contained views, opinions, or other material that was eventually reflected in the final agency document. Why wouldn't they be? Oh my god, this was a data-based freaking panel. The defendants pick up on a nuance in the law governing FOIA's application to drafts that the plaintiffs skip past. A draft, as mentioned, even if once evincing deliberation, may lose that status if it is adopted formally or informally as the agency position on an issue or is used by the agency in its dealings with the public. So, for the deliberative process to apply to a draft document, an agency must show that a document contains the ideas and theories which go into the making of the law and not the law itself. In other words, the agency's burden is to establish that documents do not constitute the working law. A document can lose its pre-decisional character and the protections of privilege if the agency adopts the documents as its own. To adopt a deliberative document, the agency must take an express choice to use the deliberative document as a source of agency guidance. So you're saying basically what you're trying to say here is that according to the law, JRC, you are saying that that protected information should no longer be protected if the articles that these people were a part of were made a part of the deliberations in the final press release. Is that what you're trying to say? You sick fucks are trying to get off on torturing kids and for it to continue, and you are really going to use a technicality. Anything to torture those kids, right? Right? Anything to keep that money flowing and keep those poor kids screaming, I guess. God. Hell is wrong with people. To adopt a deliberative document, the agency must express choice to a deliberative document as a source of agency guidance. Thus, a draft does not lose its deliberative character by resembling the version that ultimately becomes the working law, but rather its deliberative character is lost if the draft, formally or informally, becomes the working law. Applying these principles first to the early drafts of the proposed ban, so long as a draft contributed to its deliberative back and forth and was not formally the agency's working law, that draft does not lose its character because the proposed ban paralleled a draft in some measure. Indeed, the withheld draft from the plaintiff's cite, the defendants state explicitly that the draft was not in its final form. Thank you! That's why it's called a draft. God, I hate people. Second index at 474, third index at 481 and 82. Similarly, regarding the draft talking points cited by the plaintiffs, the defendants explicitly state this document contains redline edits and comment bubbles and was later turned into a version of the agency's final position. Second index at 288 through 89, third index at 290-91. As for the draft letters to the United Nations, the index is explicit that the withheld drafts contain comments from governmental employees suggesting certain changes to the draft letter before it was finalized, and explained that the letter was subsequently finalized. So they are having a bitch fit over the letter that they sent to the UN? What does that have to do with you, JRC? It was literally them informing them of the panel's decision. Literally, what the hell? And explained that the letter was subsequently finalized. Why do you need a copy of that? Okay, maybe it's just me. If there's someone out there who knows the law better than me, why did the JRC, in any stretch of the imagination, need a copy of the draft of the letter that went out to the UN to kind of tell them the final conclusion of the FDA panel? Existence of a separate final agency position explains that changes between this draft and the final version would disclose editorial judgments of government staff. Separately, the plaintiffs accused the defendants of having to apply the deliberative process privilege to draft records simply because they are drafts, or to the records that are not actually drafts. Plaintiffs provide a single example of each. Yet the FDA's executive summary prepared for April the 24th, 2014 panel, the record allegedly withheld simply because it is a draft, was withheld because this redline draft contains editorial comments of agency staff to be considered before the document was finalized. Second index at 992 and 93, and index at 1015. Then the application of Exemption 5 is proper. The record that the plaintiffs allege is not actually a draft is a version of the PowerPoint prepared to brief the FDA commissioner about a possible proposed rule at index 531 and 33, third index 584 and 40. Here, the defendants not only claim that the record is a draft, but that the comparison of this version to the final version could reveal editorial decisions of agency staff. And second index 531 through 33, third index at 538 through 40. Indeed, other entries into the Vaughan Index reference in a final version of this PowerPoint. The defendants are entitled to partial summary judgment for the draft records withheld under Exemption 5. The plaintiffs also argue that this PowerPoint is unlikely to be pre-decisional because the presentation was organized more than a year after the FDA started drafting the proposed ban. And you would know it was pre-decisional how? Dude, 126-page document that was before they had the hearings. Dear God, you all were there. By that logic in which the relevant decision is the decision to initiate some process, the deliberative process would evaporate. Rather, the decision to which the PowerPoint contributed is the promulgation of the proposed ban at index 531 and 33, third index at 538-40, a process which at the time of the presentation to the FDA Commissioner had not been completed. To facilitate review of the contested records in any subsequent round of summary judgment briefing, the defendants are directed to indicate in some manner on a subsequent version of the third Vaughan Index, or in a separate index, the specific record entries withheld under Exemption 5's deliberative process privilege, for which the defendants have been granted partial summary judgment. Okay. So the little excerpt from today, I thought this was going to be shorter than the last multiple document that we read, but I digress. Basically, here they're contesting what the FDA is called pre-decisional. The documents that contribute to the decision to make the ban, what came before, essentially. The JRC are basically asserting that they shouldn't be considered pre-decisional because they are quoted and used as part of the final decision that the ban go through. Here's the question, though. Isn't that how it works? You think about a ban. You look at all the data and the information. The data and the information confirm that this is a horrible, horrible way to treat human beings. You then use those documents, which brought you to this conclusion, and showing that as part of your reasoning as to why the panel made the decision it did. And you want to somehow use this as a means to overturn the ban. Somebody make it make sense. Somebody make it make sense. I'm going to go ahead and round things off here, folks. So, we don't get very many views on this channel, especially for these videos. The few that we do get do tend to get removed from time to time. So please don't forget to hit that like button, hit subscribe, and please don't forget to hit the comments. I do appreciate your time this morning, folks, and as always, we here at Spilling Tea hope you have a good one. Bye-bye.